Hello everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Cosmic History Codes. My name is Davyd Farrell. I'm your co-host for today's show, which is episode number 4. And as always, I'm joined by my teacher and guide from the Stellar Nations Pathway, Leslie Shankman. Hi, Leslie. How are you doing?
I'm good, Davyd. I'm happy to be able to talk about this today.
Right, me too, especially with all the things that have been happening for me recently. I'm happy to be doing any kind of recording, but I love doing these shows with you. They have given me so much over the last 12 months, really, of doing Stellar Nations and then doing these shows with you. But also the timing of this show is uber important. We've been planning it for a while. It's been in our awareness since the beginning of the year. And today we're going to be looking at the cosmic stories and stars associated with what is really quite a spectacular piece, I think, in the transition process we're in. And that is the April 8th total solar eclipse, which has a double whammy because it's also going to have a Chiron Cazimi, all happening at 19 degrees and 24 minutes of Aries. And so today, Leslie has put together another one of her wonderful slideshows and presentations and is going to talk us through the stars that are going to be affected by this sort of pendulum swinging wrecking ball effect that I think Mercury is going to have as it transitions from 27 degrees of Aries back to 15 and then forwards again, and finally leaving and entering Taurus around May the 15th. But there's a lot in this part of the Antares Code. And we're going to try not to get too bogged down because otherwise we could be here for hours and hours, which is something that we can do easily. So we're going to try and keep it very wormwood, very yarrow today, tight, efficient, but also full of all the juice that we want to share with you so that those of you who are thinking more galactically or cosmically, we can say, get an idea of how the more mundane astrology and the galactic story are playing out side by side. So that's my little preface for today. Leslie, I'm going to hand over to you. And where are we going to start today's Cosmic History Codes?
Well, why don't I start sharing the screen? We'll walk ourselves through as visuals, which is always helpful. Okay, let me start the slideshow aspect.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we know, if you've watched these already, we're basing this information on our cosmic history as told through the stars. And this comes out of the work of the Stellar Nations in Hungary, stellarnations.com. Here's some of the basic books, which is The Pathway of 13 Stellar Nations, which is really us. These stars are points of consciousness, and they're where aspects of our soul live. And if you want to talk about seeing our light body, which I think we're starting to learn to understand as part of us and we need to apprehend, we can do this well by knowing the mapping of the stars. And so the Stellar Nations Chronicles of the Milky Way history are a part of the basis of that, but they have many other writings. And today's conversation is going to bring in some other things. And I think what's really important is to understand who we are, what Earth is, what is happening in our galaxy. So I want to go through some galactic history and kind of give us a bigger context for the astrology of today. And then this will help the context of understanding the stars, which, remember, are the cells really of our light body. And they're as points of consciousness, they're like where we are learning other things or more expanded things, but we're all part of that. And we're starting to learn how to be that expansion. And what we really need to understand now is that there is a possibility for a dimensional planetary shift because the whole galaxy is experiencing a rearrangement and a reattunement and a quality shift. There are 3 grand cycles that are ending now. We've got the 26,000-year precessional cycle, the 230 million year orbit around the galactic center, and the entire Milky Way galaxy around the great central sun. But what we need to call our attention to is that this is a time that we're being called to establish a bridge of consciousness between the planetary and the galactic understanding. And we need to know that our Milky Way galaxy has been operating as a closed system, and our sun has been the orchestrator, but that's changing now. So from a book of Pleiadian Perspectives on Human Evolution, I've shared this before, but if you haven't watched before, we're literally finishing a spiral arm and about to be taken up on another spiral arm. We're moving from the evolutionary spiral of self-discovery and exploration. And that's where we go from shadow to light to explore all the potentials of consciousness in light and dark. But we're moving to the evolutionary spiral of self-mastery and completion. And it's our time now to choose spiritual mastery and responsibility, because then we can create and co-create our reality. And just trying to get the slide to move here. Okay. With this in mind, it's important to know where we're coming from. We've actually been in almost constant galactic wars throughout this creation cycle in the Milky Way galaxy. We've had, and I'll explain what this creation cycle is in a minute as far as our sun goes and what the Milky Way galaxy is in formation or how it's unfolding. But within the context of this creation cycle in the Milky Way galaxy, we had the War of the Angels, which created polarization. And that set up the mechanism to realize light through shadow. And you might say, oh, what a shame. We had an angel rebel against the divine and all this happened. Actually, it was probably the idea of the divine mind to create this as a growth cycle. Then we have a first galactic war, where within the 13 stellar nations, they can be conceived as the forms and frames of experiencing light seals or energy matrices, if you will, of the divine mind. The 13 families are ways that we can go through creation having experiences. And we have a lot of these in our subconscious anyway. Dragons, great felines, unicorns, whales. So we'll see that come into play here. But the first galactic war happened when the dragon commander Khan rebelled and declared war. And the dragons, these are parts of us. It's like our galactic DNA, these different stellar nations. And the dragons were given great physical powers. Their mission or their role in creation and as part of us is to be warriors standing up for the divine order. But they have wonderful, great powers and spiritual powers as well as physical. And their commander basically went power hungry and declared war, went against and betrayed the yin or feminine warrior group, the great felines, and the goddess and the feminine were pushed out of the galaxy during that war. The galaxy tilted yang. Now, what happened after that is all these renegades, aspects of creation, were imprisoned in a star called Baten Kaitos. Keep that in mind, because that is the star that is conjunct with Chiron and with our sun, and even with Mercury on April 8th. So we'll get there. This is background. Then a second galactic war happened when and I should say what happened in Baten Kaitos is, Baten Kaitos, we'll learn more about it, but it's basically a chamber of mirrors, kind of a timeout to make different decisions. But there were parts of creation, which are really parts of us, that were not ready to make different decisions. They liked this idea of creating their own matrix of reality as opposed to the organic divine matrix. And finally, the creative force said, okay, this part of creation, it will not learn from a chamber of mirrors. They need to be released from Baten Kaitos to get more experience and mature with experience. So with a release, those renegade souls eventually started a second galactic war. And with that, we had the fallen angel and the fallen dragon leaders merging on the star Algol, creating a hybrid type of satanic force. And this really surged the whole Shadow Alliance, because a pact was made at that point with the fallen angels, the fallen dragons, the fallen male serpents, the fallen arthropods. Now, again, there was an imprisonment in Baten Kaitos. However, again, eventually, renegade souls released. We know we're basically in some kind of larger spiritual war at this point. And these are the characters that are still playing out their inability really to face the initiation of rebirth, of joining or rejoining the organic matrix. So this all starts really, Milky Way galaxy, why? Why is it like this? The Milky Way galaxy started when our sun, known as Solana, as an angel star and an 8th Pleiadian star, a little brother to the Seven Sisters, if you will, at the start of another Aquarian age was analogous to being in an adolescent phase. So he looked at his fate, which he equated, he watched his father Saturn, his father Atlas, who later he thought of as Saturn. He watched his father, he thought just standing there. He thought, oh my God, how boring, I can't do that. So he had all these roiling urges and sun flares, and he basically broke out of his orbit. He was absolutely thrilled. However, when you do leave your fate, you lose some of your higher awareness. So he left his divine destiny, and he basically said, I'm not willing to sacrifice all for this service. And we can start making analogies with ourselves, because this is really a story that's perhaps actual, but it's metaphorically true, certainly. So when our sun fell out of orbit and suddenly realized he was losing his consciousness, he was a 6th dimensional being, he caught himself on the edge of the 4th dimension, and he started the pathway of a fateless being. And in his shock, he surrounded himself with a blanket. He went into an amnesia. He wanted to forget. Deep sadness, deep pain. It's a veil of oblivion that he pulled over himself, and it actually is the veil that created our astral plane. Originally filled with Solana's grief, but eventually, as it happens when we start to try to find our way back, we can be filled with some bitterness, anger, outrage, ambitions. We're kind of like, wait a minute, why am I forsaken? So eventually, when we came into another area of galactic day, into the photon belt, all the whisperings and love that Solana's Pleiadian family was sending to him finally reached him. And he woke up out of his oblivion enough to be stirred. And the Galactic Council came forward and said, basically, we'll give you a chance to recreate your fate. You can dream up a galaxy and learn to do what you were set to do in the first place. And that's the inception of the Milky Way galaxy. And every planet is a dream of Solana's, of our suns. And it's either a part of his memory or a piece of his psyche, some part of himself, or a member of his Pleiadian family. Now, the first planet that he co-created with was Tiamat, which is a beautiful, huge, watery world, and is a very feminine, known as the maiden who gives life. And this was his first dream, to form Tiamat with all the memories of his Pleiadian family, his 7 sisters, his parents, Atlas and Pleione. And then Tiamat helped him as the co-creator of the solar system. And as I said, they were formed, the planets, as a reflection of his memories. And basically, he was seeking to return to his original divine destiny. And Tiamat represents sea deep love, acceptance, forgiveness, sensitive, intuitiveness. It's the whole essence of the goddess being. And she was about the size of Uranus and Neptune, and she orbited between Mars and Jupiter. All right, that beautiful Tiamat turned into the raging female, right? How somehow in our consciousness, we have that ability to think of the female who gets angry as raging and crazy. Now, why did this happen? Well, in the trace of our galactic history, Tiamat was so sensitive to the Pleiadian stars. And in the Second Galactic War, after we had the fallen angel and the fallen dragon merging, they were a very sexually potentized type of raw force, and they lost some of their abilities. They fell in some of their abilities. I mean, they could still be beautiful and had many wiles, but they didn't have the dimensional reach anymore. So they actually breached the Pleiadian star Electra, which was the cosmic humans living on Electra at that time were just taking up the initiation pathway of the female serpents. And that is a healing pathway, a healing part of ourself that understands Tantra. Tantra in the use of the body sexually, but also that broader sense of Tantra and how to understand that we're one with everything. So what these fallen beings did is they breached Electra, basically. They fooled her. She thought that this incredible man that was coming to them for initiation as she was taking this new pathway up was a gift from the god or something, but it was really not. It was in disguise the fallen forces. And the reason they wanted to breach Electra was they didn't have the abilities to reach the higher dimensions anymore. And this is not very pleasant, but they basically could take over Electra through the tantric acts and sometimes use her being to find the information they wanted to from the other dimensions. So her whole integrity, everything was despoiled. And this is actually the second frontal assault to the feminine. What I should have said, I don't know if I made it clear, but in the first Galactic War, when the dragons betrayed the great felines, they actually expelled, I did say that, they expelled the great felines and tilted the galaxy young. So this is a second attack as far as Electra being breached. Now, Tiamat felt this and just went crazy. This is the face of the enraged female. Tiamat in the story popped out 11 moons because of how crazy, how angry this got her. And the sun, Solana said, sisters, come down. And they started, Electra's maidens started making their way to Tiamat for refuge. But at that point, the fallen male serpents had been released unrepentant from Baten Kaitos, and they knew enough. They knew the codes of creation to call in a morphogenic field of a new planetary world. They created a fourth dimensional space. That's why it's invisible to us. Largely, it's in the fourth dimension, not the third. But they created this planet, Nibiru, that has an elliptical orbit around the sun of 3,600 years. It comes into the Milky Way galaxy and comes between Mars and Jupiter every 3,600 years. But what happened is they were about to come into the orbit of the Milky Way galaxy when the daughters of Electra were coming down to Tiamat. They basically chased them. So they were in the pathway of Tiamat. And that was the first entry of Nibiru. And Nibiru's attack on Tiamat basically ripped her apart. It smashed into her, extinguished her life breath, threw Tiamat's head into orbit between Venus and Mars, which is today's Earth. And one of Tiamat's moons which was known as a great emissary and Amazon general, was dragged with her head, and that's today's Earth moon. And the daughters of Electra were clinging to the moon, which is part of why we have this understanding as the moon is very feminine. So we can even know, here's the daughters of Electra clinging to the moon. We can even know that Earth's crust is missing somewhat under the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific is really analogous to the way Tiamat was, the Sea of Tiamat, that was such a watery world. And that's one of the reasons that Lemuria was born in the Pacific, which was to heal Tiamat's wound with the Pleiadian goddess energies. But at the same time, the Pleiades are very enlightened worlds now, but they haven't always been. They've gone through the light and dark of the photon belt as well. So the Lemurian age actually was a correspondent kind of healing on both levels. Interestingly, Tiamat's other moons are scattered and turned, many of them, well, they turned into comets. And comets orbit at a different, they orbit different than the anti-clockwise cycle of most of the planets. And that's because they were pulled into the Nibiru clockwise orbit. And I only bring this up because we are having a comet together with this eclipse you may have heard about. It's known as, I think, the Pons Comet. We don't have to read all this, but it's from spaceweather.com. And it's interesting about this comet. Last summer, they started seeing it and they called it the Devil's Comet, which is too bad, really, because it does spire geysers out, and they thought it looked like devil's horns. The reason it spires geysers is because when it gets closer to the sun, the gaseous and watery nature in parts of the comet are actually warmed and they spire out in spirals. But there's interesting thing about this particular comet. When it's looked at closely at the core, usually they spend a lot of time looking at the tail. But when they look at the core of this comet, it's in a yin-yang shape, which if you think of it as potentially or possibly probably one of Tiamat's moons, and it's carrying the yin-yang, and we're hearing about the breach on the feminine, and I think we know what we're being asked to do, and the stars tell us this too, we'll get to it. We're being asked to understand that we've missed half of ourselves for eons, and that we need to call back and accept the feminine and know the feminine. So,
Leslie, that's also part of the reason why the ladies from Hungary have intuited and channeled that this is the year of the dragon and the great felines, because in the Eastern traditions, you often see the tiger and the dragon in the yin yang, which I think is really, really interesting. It's like they have an understanding of that already in those Eastern traditions. And I've started using that more as a symbol to meditate on with the yin yang, but also with the understanding of the roles of the dragons and the cats. So I find that kind of interesting from that perspective too.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, thank you. And that's a whole other story, this being the year of the dragons and the but that's part of the point. We'll get through as much as we can today, but I hope we can leave the impression that we live within this active galaxy that we do take part in, our consciousness takes part in, that what we haven't really been aware of. I mean, we have in the sense that we watch the 3D repercussions, but we're really being called to expand into understanding that this is an outplay of the breadth of ourselves. And, when I first found the Stellar Nations, it was in 2013, and I read this and I was really angry actually, because I was like, are you kidding me? I've been living my life thinking that there's these higher forces and they're all good on this bad little thing down here. And then I'm like, wait a minute, the span of creation is working its way out in polarity. And yes, there are stars that are pure light, non-polarized. We're going to see that here in a minute. But these stars as points of consciousness where our souls lives are working things out too, within a different setting, within a galactic setting. So we're trying to become, I'm not going to say perfect, but we're trying to grow and evolve together. It's not like we're lesser than down here. In fact, when we accomplish something on the third dimension, we send that energy back to that stellar world, and that helps the evolution of the stellar world as well. So Nibiru did come back for a second return 3,600 years later, this time smashed the back of Tiamat, which is what created the asteroid belt. Also, threw Saturn's moon out, which is what Pluto was once Saturn's moon, which is pretty interesting if you start thinking about the role of Pluto and Saturn, and maybe kind of explains why does Pluto have such a weird orbit and kind of a tilt. So then we have the feminine asteroids in the asteroid belt, but it kind of takes on new meaning if we realize, wait a minute, these are pieces of Tiamat. This is holding the shadows and light of bigger stories here, particularly with the feminine. Now, there's a whole other aspect here just to bring up, because it plays into our sun, which we're going to get to, the feeling of our sun, like our son trying to recreate his fate and having all these things happen. It's not going so smoothly. It's not a boring job. He's not just holding things in place. It's like he's got to be the balance of motion. There was a point at which we had a planet in the solar system called Maldek. There's a number of reasons that it was being shepherded by the light angel Lucifer before he lost trust in the divine, fell deeply into the spiritual ego, which in the end ended up having Maldek explode into a million pieces. Interesting point, we've got the Kuiper belt. I asked Beatrix to attune into this last summer, and said, could it be that Maldek is the Kuiper belt? And she pretty much got that, yeah, and there's a central question behind that. And the question has to do with, really, is there a God? Like, what kind of universe do we live in? Can we trust? And that was coming out of the trauma, and not only of Maldek, but the whole Milky Way system, really. So that's a possibility. So this is where I want to bring us to the point of we get to this absolute agony of our sun. Tiamat, Venus, Mars, Maldek are destroyed. So he's having this inconsolable longing for home, and he's just praying for mercy. And he knows, though, that it's not enough that he recognizes and accepts his fall, and he takes on all these cycles and regains his fate. It's necessary, if he wants to go home, to take the solar system with him, because that's what his fate is now. He's created it, and he's supposed to sustain it and maintain it and lead all of us through our personal collective karmic processes. So here's the deal with Earth. Every planetary body and every star has at its core the Holy Spirit, which is one of the 13 stellar nations, and it's actually the quantum field that holds everything. It's the breath of the absolute. But the Holy Spirit is holding the plan for that planetary body or star in the center, the plan of the divine mind. So the plan of the divine mind for Earth is that Earth is a planet of redemption. It's where we finally realize universe unity and diversity, because it's basically a melting pot for damaged, displaced, evolving souls. It's kind of like we're a reflection on Earth of our own sun, trying to re-find our fate. Now, that doesn't mean we're all disparate and terrible, but it is a place for things to be worked out. However, with this cry out for mercy that our sun made, there was there was a galactic response to that from whatever the Galactic Council is. And that is, they called out to souls from around the different galaxies who had been through this kind of developmental cycle before. And they created and pulled together an alliance of light. And the alliance of light has had three great visitation cycles, if you will, to the Earth. The first time was in Lemuria to set up the whole outpicturing of what it's like to live with the feminine goddess energy again, just so it would be in our field, so we would know it, even because we had to go on to let that go and bring out the karmic problems we'd created with tilting the galaxy young. But it gave us kind of a feeling for what it was. That's the beauty of the Lemurian time. The second time the Alliance of Light came was during the time when Christ came to Earth, because Earth was at a very, very dark point at that time. And the third time is now, basically, because in 1887, there was a cry out from the collective. The collective kind of woke up from some of the coma and trauma it was in, particularly after the Atlantean debacle. And the fate alternative of a apocalypse was really big in the morphogenic field of Earth. But our collective unconscious response was a cry out to say, can we do something else? So from 1887 to 1987, there was a whole working out and setting up, moving vibrational energies, people, getting things together, checking things out, until finally 1987, with the harmonic convergence, that was enough of a response that the fate alternative of the ascension was set to run parallel. And we've been like going fast ever since, particularly since we started to come into the light of the photon belt in 1999. So I just want to say about the Alliance of Light. Apparently, this is where the number 144,000 comes from, 144,000 souls, incarnate and also disincarnate. There is a whole range of souls that are our allies. And when we come to life, if we've come as one of the Alliance of Light members, we're not necessarily taking easy, wonderful life paths on. We've volunteered to go through certain karmic charges and dark and emotional mental patterns, depending on what our resonances are. And we need to burn through the hell of those. And we're trying to pull out, transfigure, redeem in the name of pure intention and faith, really. So this is, I'm just saying there's a couple forces at work here. We probably know this, but this is within the context of the galactic history. And there's many writings that this is all coming out through that are in English at this point. Okay, so working out karmic knots on Earth, maybe it helps to know what are the 7 solar system karmic patterns. This comes from a book, Pleiadian Perspectives on Human Evolution, Amara Kuan Yin, that also Bayanonical feel is good, accurate information. So they refer to it. But we've got, as karmic patterns, we've got arrogance, addiction, prejudice, hatred, violence, victimhood, and shame. There's 7 ego allurements also that are specific to Earth: lust, laziness, gluttony, pride, anger, envy, greed. Okay, so this takes us now finally to the Cazimi, which happens on April 8th with the eclipse. So we're getting a lot going on. And as we said, we have the Cazimi happening at 1924 of Aries. And really what I've been trying to say, Davyd, is we've been talking on these Cazimis. We noticed early in the year, you and I, oh gosh, Cazimi, Cazimi, Cazimi. And my light bulb went off. Wait a minute, we're coming into another Aquarian age. And our sun, who has been working on refinding his divine destiny, the intention of the light inside of him, through his orchestration of the Milky Way galaxy, I'm thinking, wait a minute, our sun is going through a cycle of adulting, if you will. I mean, he left his pathway when he had the adolescent urges, but not the perspective that he's had from experiencing, which we can see perspective we get from experiencing, which might answer one of the questions of why would the creative force let these renegades out of Baten Kaitos continuously, saying, oh, they need more experience. Anyway, this quote here, Bayanonical, I mean, they actually have the ability to, they've been stellar oriented from the earliest, from Lemurian times. So they have the ability, a lot of this information literally is them going to the consciousness of the sun. And the sun told them that he felt Chiron was a celestial body that literally arrived in galactic space, fell into the solar system, and as a karmic mirror, and was actually kind of a gift to him, not only to show himself, his own falling and revealing, but also to act as a living mirror for the inhabitants of the galaxy. So we know Chiron that way as well. I mean, we realize that. Now, the stars we have on are coming through the Dragon Nation, the Whale Nation, and the Arthropod Nation. And Baten Kaitos, and then a dragon star, I'll explain them.
Yes, so that's a very detailed, I think, introduction there, Leslie, which is really, really important. And hopefully our audience have managed to stay with the setting up of where we're coming to, because it's basically the background of everything that's going to come, at least I feel, with this eclipse. And interestingly, a couple of things jumped out at me there. First of all, we talked before about the explosions of Tiamat and the asteroid belt, but also Malnet being the Kuiper belt object. So I think that's conversations for another time, but very interesting. But something about the date 1887, and of course, this is partly in conjunction with the Mayan Time and Magic course that Bella has been releasing at this time also, and which you're going to be with us on for part of the journey too. 1887, and this is a bit more of a rabbit hole theory, but I'm just going to throw it in, makes me think of Tartaria at a moment when humanity was seemingly meant to kick into a different space and evolve, and somehow a catastrophe happened, and then is getting obliterated. So this is all it's very Jose Arguelles, it's very Mayan time, it's very much about timelines, but also it makes me wonder what happened at that point for humanity to have that collective cry out that has set up basically the last 140 odd years that we've now been trying to work through with the energy of the 60s and the 80s and 2012 and the harmonic convergence and all of those things coming to this point. So just a couple of thoughts on that. As a good Buddhist, seeing the 7 lists makes me think of the 7 deadly sins and what we have to overcome. So those are just a few thoughts just to throw into the pot, I guess. But please carry on with the stars, because I think this is where we really start to bring all the threads together, right?
That's a long way to get to the stars, but it's important because honestly, these are the patterns in our subconscious that are coming up. And I think we need to know, the breadth of it, and that we're all in this collectively. And this is an evolution of our full self, including our light bodies. So Baten Kaitos is in the belly of what's called the Cetus constellation, known as the sea monster. And this was the place for the karmic lockdown, if you will. So let's explain it a little bit. It has a slightly different meaning coming through the dragon and the whales, but it's pertinent to know this and something for us to keep in mind. And it also, I'm not going to get into this now, but the internet has blown up about the fact, even people have mentioned that Baten Kaitos is on. What does it mean? Because the pathway, the eclipse is going over like 8 or 9 towns called Nevia, which are part of the Jonah story with the whale. But that's an aside. Okay, so Baten Kaitos, 2217 Aries, but the orb is such that it's...
Let me just jump in there, because I think it is really important. The city is actually Nineveh, which relates to one of the Sumerian cities, which is very much linked to the serpents and downstream from the Anunnaki. So I think it is very, very important. The story of Jonah is connected to the whale. And I think that the more you go into some of these parallel side stories, which we can invite our audience to investigate, the more you'll see how the correspondences, the resonances, and the coherency all starts to fit into the much bigger picture. So I personally think it's very, very interesting, and we'll leave it up to our audience to work out, but I just wanted to add that
Well,
in. So.
I actually do too, but we'd be here for 20 years because the thing about, I mean, I actually, when I heard that and then I read that Jonah's, when he finally made it, he tried to rebel against what he was supposed to do. He didn't want to go to this very fallen city where he was supposed to preach. He had a very small sermon to them. If you don't repent in 40 days, you know, you're toast. So I counted 40 days, and it actually happens. 40 days is the Jupiter Cazimi, which I think is really interesting because we're following this Cazimis as the idea of Solana learning to adult. Jupiter is actually Solana's memory of himself. It's the true essence of him in the beautiful way, the expanded self. It's just that we saw when it was misused in an adolescent framework, there wasn't enough experiencing or context to know consequences. So now when we come to our Jupiter Cazimi, which is after all this is all really very linked. So, but literally we could talk for 20 hours. So I'll try to stay on track here.
40 days is also a really, really important time span, right? For cleansing. It's also the time of a vision quest. I think you also said it's the time that Jesus goes into the desert to withstand the temptations of, we can say, these fallen beings and how they would tempt us maybe through the 7 deadly sins of lust and all of those wonderful other enjoyable activities that take us far, far away from our destiny and into the realms of free will, all of which, of course, is part of Lucifer's gambit. So we're seeing all of the different pieces come together here. And maybe, and I'm taking this quite personally myself, because that, as you know, that Jupiter Cazimi is very, very pertinent for me in my own astrology. I'm taking it as a personal 40-day vision quest from the point of the eclipse. And especially being immobilized at the moment, I don't really have an awful lot of space to move around. So I can go into a meditation space for 40 days. And perhaps in some way, that's what we're all being encouraged to do, is to meditate our way through this 40 days of transition, however that is going to look after this eclipse in Cazimi. So food for thought, I guess.
Right. And actually, that's really partly why I want to bring up this galactic history. I want us to, in our introspection, really expand out and understand that we're part of something bigger. Because remember, we're needing to change our focus from just being citizens of the Earth to being citizens of the galaxy. I mean, everything, the Mayan calendar says that, everything says that. And that's what the photon belt is about. We're getting all this information. But Baten Kaitos at this chamber of mirrors, it's a 4th dimensional world. And so suddenly beings who have experienced the freedom of other frequencies closed down because of their actions, asked to take a time out, essentially. It's at 2217 of Aries, but the orb is such that it's on the Sun and it's on Chiron and it's on Mercury. But I want to point out something interesting here. The sun, anything with the sun near 23 Aries reflects our sun's rebellion, because it's exactly opposite Spica, which is the 8th dimensional angel star that is totally non-polarized at 23 of Libra. So what we're seeing is the polarity of absolute light, and then the dark here of Baten Kaitos. But this is just an interesting fact to know that when things are around 23 Aries, well, particularly the sun, it's reflecting this rebellion against Spica, or the idea of the divine, perhaps, or divine fate. So through the Dragon Nation, what the Baten Kaitos is, the Dragon Nation, which guards and upholds divine order. This marks the location of the galactic execution of judgment, of delivering cosmic justice. Basically, it's a karmic school, and you're being shut down here for committing galactic transgressions. So we're being asked to face and recognize wrongdoings, come to admitting, see what's going on. It limits our soul's creative freedom until we can really understand destructive and faulty motivations. We can see what happens when we do the wrong things inside of the ecosystem of the whole. which is what the god and the goddess have set up. And we need to fully realize that we're in this larger ecosystem of divine principles, really. So this is a whole lockup of inhibiting of self-expression until we can take responsibility and balance our cycles of karma, which can lead us back to our original fate or divine destiny. Okay, now through the whale nation, the story is a little bit different. There's angels that were shut down in Baten, Kaitos, who literally became like frozen in rock. And they started to see what they had done. And the Chamber of Mirrors was working for them. Oh my God, I want my original fate back. I want to go back to the divine. It's literally the yearning of the whale sound is reminiscent of these rocks were crying out. They finally were granted mercy. All they had to do was surrender to it, which they did. So the angel part of us started coming out of this frozen rock, started coming out of Baten Kaitos, was reborn out of the tail of the Cetus constellation, which is the star Diptha. It's at 256 of Aries, but these angels were reborn into the light body of a whale. Now, this is a totally compassionate, realized being on their way home, still has a little bit of penance, but the new mission is to hear the divine mind, and with their whale sounds, etherically and literally on Earth, to repair the grids, because they're carrying the song of the divine mind, and there's a morphogenic grid around everything, and we live on the Earth not living in concert with the divine mind. The grid's fray. The whales are constantly singing the vibratory quality of the divine mind, repairing the grids. That's what they do. So they're really carrying on an angelic type of mission, and they're working their way back to home, their creator, to the intention of the divine inside them. This represents a part of ourselves kind of that's in a metamorphosis process, definitely on our way back, definitely had some realization, not necessarily completely back, like still making the journey through some different steps. It turns out that, I just point out that Venus is at 420 of Aries on April 8th. So we have this Aries stellium, and Venus is actually on the star that's on, well, she's in the Aries stellium, and the star that's coming through her is Diptha, this rebirth. Now, here's another interesting thing. That Cetus constellation, often happens in the stellar nations. We come to see in our cosmic history, we've projected certain constellations in the sky, like we see the Cetus constellation in our mythology now. But actually, originally, particularly during Lemurian times when they looked up the sky, it wasn't the Cetus constellation as we see it. It was actually a celestial orca whale. Now, why does that matter? So the orca carries a kind of protective warrior energy. And the supposition that Baten made on seeing this is that maybe it became a sea monsters in the humans' collective unconscious later, because it's exactly its mission codes to attack and destroy the ones who continuously harm the integrity and the morphogenic field of a planet or star. In other words, those shadow forces that are going to get locked up in it and are, they're seeing it as a monster. Don't catch me.
You know what, Leslie, as you're saying this, and this is perhaps more for some of our own audience who've done some of the protocols on quantum plant healing, but many of us have been dealing with a force in our world that we call the tentacles, the sea monsters. And one of the only animals that is able to eat or dispose of the sea monsters, many of whom are being flushed to the surface, actually in the news at the moment, in the form of giant squids and so on, actually is the killer whale. It's the only, most of the bodies of these animals that have been found in the bodies of whales. Very few have ever been found alive. So I've often thought that's an interesting supposition there as to how like the sea monsters have remained hidden from view, but actually do affect the morphogenetic field. In my understanding, they actually help create with the arthropods the matrix that we've been living under. So again, this is a very, very hidden part of human history, still very hidden, I think, to most people, but some of our audience might understand that in terms of that more hidden aspect of what is at the bottom of the sea. So I don't know, I think it's interesting, but I think it's also part of being brought into the awareness.
And your point makes makes also the point that we are trying to make, that, whoa, there's a lot that we don't see. And
Literally don't see, right?
And not to scare us, but to really gain respect for the fact that there's so much more. But at any rate, that we could pull that out a little maybe later. But just to finish on the Orca, it's actually swimming in stellar space, supervising and overseeing. It's actually there to expose the alliance of the shadow forces, to attack them if necessary, to prevent the injury to energy fields, ethereal bodies, stars, planets. So it's there to help the suffering and innocent, to save holy worlds. And then also, interestingly, the celestial Orca, just going down to the bottom highlight, living on Earth, are in very deep and direct connection with the galactic law that comes through the stars of Betelgeuse, Bellatrix, and Capella, because those are mirrors of the celestial law in the sky. Because as I said, like, I mean, I don't know if I made it clear, but each star is a world. It's a stellar world. We live in such a vast space, and we can explore that. And you were going to say something.
Well, just in conclusion to this point, and of course, with the work that I do, I tend to have slightly different takes on certain things according to the work of the Light Alliance in the shadow spaces. That's been part of my work over the last 10 years, and dealing or learning how to deal with some of these very, very esoteric forces that have been behind everything. And people like Rudolf Steiner have talked about these forces and referred to them under certain names, which I'm not going to repeat here on this podcast. But I think it's fascinating that the beings that lie at the bottom of the ocean who remain hidden, who I perceive are very much responsible for the overlays, the matrices which we've been living in, that have been utilized and manipulated through things like the Roman Catholic Church and the television and all of the things that the shadow forces have brought to bear. The being that is responsible for the fixing of the morphogenetic field, which is the orca whale, is the being that actually undoes that energy. So I see that we've always got these counterpoises, that even if something is deeply hidden, deeply psychological, deeply manipulative, as I believe these beings are, we have these other beings that can say, hey, it doesn't matter. We've got the solution over here. All you have to do is bring it into your awareness. And so I like that idea, because it means for me that there is and it's my magic teacher told me, there is always a solution for every single problem, Davyd. All you have to do is go into your higher mind and ask to see what is that solution, and something will present itself. And again, here I see that we've already got all of the solutions to all of what could or may happen during the rest of 2024 in place. All we have to do is be in a place of trust, I think, Leslie.
Yes. And I mean, it's just like every single plant has a signature, and there's an energy signature to heal anything, really, if we knew. Exactly. So it's the same idea. I'm not going to get too deeply into it now, but unfortunately, there was a genetic manipulation to some orcas during the time of Atlantis. And it's still in the strain of some orcas. And that's why some orcas will actually eat mammals as opposed to fish. They were trained to attack in a different way. They were trained to be warriors, but not attack the right things. And it's a pure genetic manipulation done during Atlantean times. The whale nation has been trying to deal with that, and many forces have been, but it still exists a little bit. It's just a sad remnant. Okay, the other star we have on the Sun and Chiron, I mentioned, is an arthropod star. We all know from many, kind of, cultural influences of Mother Spider, of the web of life. And the arthropods are the weavers and sustainers of the chronicles of life. The web goes through everything that's created. And what happens then is there are certain stars that will take that information and sort of technologically have the ability to pass it on in a certain way to the creator. I mean, the creator has, ordained this web because it's part of the feedback mechanism to the creator and part of the living relationship with the creator and creation. With the fallen arthropods, they have taken some of the technology, and at some of those stars, they're using it negatively. They're using it to reverse information, to misuse it, to do mind manipulations. I mean, we know in our world, we see it at work. I have to say that the star that's out now is one that's not being used positively. So there's the potential of information that's gathered to be misconstrued. I think we know that scene, but it happens to also be out with Chiron and the Sun. Now,
I mean, if we just put that into the context of what's already in our earthly space, Leslie, I think it's really very clear that there is still not a completely clean medium machine. We still have a very hijacked, and it's difficult to tell now what is the truth channels, what is the illusion channels, what is the light letting stuff happen because it needs to through the dark. It's very, very confusing, and I think that that's part of the picture, that we're having to learn discernment. And so even though we've got these negative arthropod stars that we can say even are connected to the matrix or to the propaganda machines, to the media, etc., it is a part of the illusory piece, which is still, I think, somewhat connected to what Neptune is doing over in Pisces, and we're having to learn to see through the murky water. And I think it's also part of the process we're in. So unpleasant as it is, I still perceive it's important for us as humans in this journey.
Well, if we take the highest perspective and look down at this field, it's actually the polarization and the push and the confusion is to make us find the truth of our light. That's even a star that's out on Saturn and Mars. I don't know if we'll get to it, but it's literally analogous to the Egyptian meditation in the sarcophagus. You're going to die if you can't pierce the darkness with your light. I mean, we're in a very huge initiation, actually. And this is part of why I wanted to bring up our cosmic history, so we can understand, if we feel whatever, bereft or whatever, it's like, okay, it's not personal. We are in this huge, I mean, it may be personal, of course it is on some levels, but we have to know, I mean, that's one of the karmic, things we have to get out of is victimhood. We cannot do this if we're in victimhood. So
remember how much that came up during the Oak immersion, Leslie, where we also did a piece about the asteroid Quercus, and I think it was one of our brothers channeled the message, I will not forsake you. And I think that is such an important mantra in this moment, is that our higher selves, our future selves, creative spirit, we are not going to be forsaken by anybody unless we consistently choose to be, through victimhood and through deviation away from our divine destiny. And that, I think, is part of the initiation process we're in, and we have to keep remembering that, and not to get pulled into places where trust and surrender breaks down.
Yes, and that's exactly it. To not be forsaken, we have to remember that the wisdom and power of the light, and that the light is stronger than the dark, and that we have it in us and we can find it. And so the getting to Mercury now, which is also plays in this stellium here of Aries. Now, Mercury in Solana's mind travels closest to him and is always whispering heavenly news to him, in essence, from his family. And it's basically telling him, you're not alone, your stellar family loves you. That's the deepest meaning of this planetary ray when you look at it through the stellar nations lens. It also has a higher octave because it's a galactic mirror, and it's a transformative energy field, which amplifies the message of the stars that come through Mercury. So we're going to look at that in a minute. And we need to pay special attention, especially in our incarnation, when these stars are coming through, because they speak to us meeting our fate, increasing our consciousness, making karmic settlements. So what's on Mercury? Okay, let's look. Well, we've got Baten Kaitos again. Okay, we know that now. We've got those two energies of it coming through. You can be reborn from Baten Kaitos, right? That's what the fallen angel who accepted mercy showed us. Yeah, it's a really hard thing. I don't know if we realize the depth of surrender we need to know to go into this state, but that's part of what this extensive polarization is showing us. So we also have the Andromeda Galaxy on Mercury. Now, the Andromeda Galaxy is where the great felines, they either died in the first galactic war when they were betrayed by the dragons. A few of them were left stealthily hiding out. Anybody who could made it out to the one remaining portal to the Andromeda Galaxy. All this time on the Andromeda Galaxy, those traumatized souls have been in a cycle of working out and healing. And they finally reached a point where they got the grace of having an incredible master feline soul come to them and give them all kinds of training and healing. And that is coming back. I mean, this is the year in the stellar nations. We are always getting from year to year imprinted with the energy patterns of certain stellar nations are coming into our collective consciousness based on what we need to learn and grow in this cycle of what's happening. So we've got the great feline coming back in force. And this is the year of the great feline and the year of the dragons. It's the two warrior nations. Warrior being such a pure impetus to stand up for something noble. But we also know warrior at its lowest octave. We've been in constant wars on the planet Earth as well. But the great feline is coming back carrying the freedom's eternal fire, the frame of freedom, the right use of free will and sovereignty. Really, the idea of freedom as a sacred tool for fulfilling one's destiny.
So I just want to add in a note there around that, because it's in the later degrees of Aries. It's a 28 something of Aries, and by my calculations, Mercury won't actually hit that part of this journey until about the 13th or 14th of May. So my understanding of that, Leslie, is that that's the final message from Mercury, really, as it leaves the Aries piece. And there is quite a bit around the end of Aries, as we know. But that, as I understand it, that part of the journey that Mercury's on isn't going to happen for about another 6 weeks yet. So I think that's what we're moving towards.
Yeah, I think we can say
that's
that.
how I'm reading it in the filter of Mercury. So I don't know if you have a comment around that.
Well, I do, in the sense that it's going to be a little confusing if we try to be straight astrology, in the sense that the reason I brought Mercury in, I think you're right. Yes, and we can look at that. But the reason I brought Mercury in now, it's at 2450 of Aries, and it happens to be in the orb of Baten Kaitos. So because it's in the same orb as the Sun and of Chiron, I thought it was worth mentioning, because it's remember, Mercury is amplifying the message. So it's amplifying, hey, listen to this about Baten Kaitos, but it's telling us two more things right now. It's saying, hey, look,
you're absolutely right, actually, Leslie, because what I haven't added is that the Mercury went retrograde at 27 degrees of Aries on April the 1st, on April Fool's Day. So it's like the journey starts at that point, swings all the way back, and then comes forwards again for a resolution, maybe. That's maybe more a complete picture. So that makes more sense, and trying to see how all the pieces fit together with Mercury communicating all of these messages to us is a bit like a pendulum swing. And so we kind of have to go through the retrograde process, reviewing all the things that you've shared, to go back to the I think it's the degree of 15 Aries, which is also linking back very much to astrology of last summer. And then it moves again forward through, and it feels like the energy is going to get released with that forwards motion. So that makes a lot more sense. So sorry for interjecting. I was just trying to
no, that's fine. Because actually if we stick, I don't know how long we want to go, but if we talk about the moon and the North Node, well, the North Node is at 15 degrees of Aries, so I can tell you the star there, which is, and you can think of Mercury, your whole idea of it running around, right, back and forth. It's kind of interesting. If you think of it as this amplifying message, it's like the town crier running around going, look over here, look, you know, every day trying to get a little angle on it. But on this day, on the 8th,
isn't Mercury the narrator of the story, Leslie? A bit like you in some ways. I feel that you're a very mercurial energy with stellar nations, and that Mercury's here to highlight the story through, first of all, the astrology, for those that know that, but for those of us who are more cosmically orientated, it's like, well, here's the micro and here's the macro. And I find it so interesting that Bella's literally been working on the big galactic counts of the Mayans, which are showing us how to time travel into other bigger cycles, but through the planets and stars that they revolve around. So everything is interlinked. And I think that according to where you put your attention, you're going to get a different message from Mercury.
Exactly.
Somehow.
But that's part of the point. When you come fully into the present, everything's there. And how do you learn to deal with that? Well, when you start knowing these stellar aspects of yourself, you realize that you literally can walk into a million different rooms and they've all got, but you're knowing the identity of them, sort of. It's got a coherence. You're not just overwhelmed by, the mass of it. Because truly, we live in a galaxy. I mean, I always remembered after I started getting into this, that phrase from the Bible, in my Father's house there are many mansions. I'm like, oh my God, every star is a mansion. It's a world. And it's got dynamics and things going on. So if we keep going, I was mentioning here, the next star is on the male serpent nation. And not to overdo it here, but just to know that these are all parts of ourselves. The male serpent nation are teachers of divine knowledge, knowing the tree of life. I mean, on the third dimension, do we all know that? Not necessarily, but we may have galactic DNA that's strong in the male serpent nation. So the star that is out on Mercury is Akhamar at 2337 of Aries. It's the trial of intention. So it's the idea that the male serpent he's passed so many initiations, knows so much, but then the initiation here is, okay, you know so much. What will you do with this knowledge? Because knowledge is to be used as a means for building the bridge between the consciousness of the universes, the worlds, the planets, the stars, and the human souls that have been separated from the creator, from universal life. So this is another sort of overriding reflective point for us to look at in this time period. What do we know? How are we going to use it? I don't know how we're doing on time. Do you want to go into this?
We have about another 5 to 10 minutes maximum, Leslie. But just also on the last point, which I think is really interesting, is that the next Mayan wave spell that starts is the white magnetic dog, which is really in connection to the heart, and it starts on the same day as the eclipse and the Chiron Cazimi. And when we're connected into the heart, it connects us directly to the world of intention, which is the fifth dimension. And so I think that we're being initiated, as you've talked about many times, and we have too, which is like, what is the fifth dimension really? It's the place of manifestation with the energy of the goddess being brought down with conscious clarity into the 3D realm for manifestation. But that has to be done with intention. Our imagination, the intentional realms, is how we create. And so I think that, again, we're getting a little hit here from Mercury. It's like, pay attention to your intention, right? Because your intention is everything. If you intend a much brighter world and you keep showing up for yourself in that frequency, then that is what will manifest. If you keep putting your attention and intention to lower frequency stuff, then that is what will show up for you right now. So I think that's also really interesting and important too.
Right. And on that note, I would say, well, how do you develop a good intention? You actually need the experiences. You need the experience of making mistakes, of going between light and dark. And that's why, really, this is not a punishing creation cycle. This is an evolutionary creation cycle, so we can go on to be co-creators. Because just like our sun is telling us, he left his divine fate or the intention of the light in him when he didn't understand it. And now he's trying to regain that, but he only has that perspective now from all these experiences, watching all this stuff happen, all these wars. So we've got the moon. I took this at the time of the Chiron Cazimi. So the moon's not quite the 19 degrees, it's 1813. And the north node of Aries is 1539. But it's interesting because it puts a star on it that's on both of them, which you pointed out Mercury is going to go back to. It's got arthropod stars. Both of them are carrying the negative arthropod star. North node, our intention of going forward, is also carrying a proper use of the arthropod there. So let's just quickly look at what Alpha is. It's coming through 3 nations. So we've got the Pegasus nation, which is the part of us that's a messenger, the part of creation, the messenger. We're close to the divine mind. We hear something from the divine mind. We're asked to take it as a seed of light, basically, as a message into the darkness. It's a message of the living news coming from the divine mind. Alpha is a launch pad. I'm going to go through this very quickly, but the idea is when you get to this stellar world, there's literally 4 different sections of this world. It's very watery, but there's 4 different sections as well. And your being goes to the particular launch pad, one of the 4, based on what is the message it's supposed to deliver. You're being asked to go into a certain setting or frequency with an understanding and lead a seed of life there. And you're needing to match yourself and your understanding to where you're going to deliver this message. So if you're going from a first, second, or if you're going into a world that's the 4th dimension, you're literally going in a sort of spacecraft type of vehicle, which isn't really real metal. It looks metal. It's like a plasma metal. But I think this is interesting if we think about, this whole idea of UFOs and such. Is that ourselves visiting ourselves? So since we're in these dimensions perceiving. On the 5th, if you have to deliver a 5th dimensional message, there's literally like a lotus that's got a crystal in it, and you sit down there and root your root chakra to it, and your whole being and intention can move that lotus to where it's destined to go. If you're doing 6th, 7th, 8th dimensional, there's some kind of huge kind of hill or mountain on Alpharez that you go to, and you turn into a light body and depart in your light body to those dimensions, because that's appropriate for delivering the message there. If you have a message to bring between Pegasus stellar worlds, you literally go from the 4th launch pad, which is within the vehicle of the Pegasus, to go from one Pegasus star to another. Okay, so the next stellar nation is the dolphins that comes through Alpharez. And in the watery part of Alpharez, and dolphins are the community of the galactic healers on Earth and throughout interstellar space. And they are, they basically, the part of us that actually has never left, have never betrayed creation. And their dolphin song is singing the frequencies of love. And love is not an emotion. It's a frequency that the creative force puts out. So what are the dolphins singing? They're singing this to impart it on the Pegasus part of ourself, the messenger's part, but they're also singing for us to remember in the galaxy. They're singing the voice of stellar consciousness. They're basically saying, remember that you're not just a little everyday human. You are bigger. You have this whole stellar aspect to yourself. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, the whales come through Alpharez. And remember, I talked about the whales being the redeemed angels, accepted mercy, compassionate beings on their way back, metamorphosizing. The whales here have their message from the divine mind, and they're launching into whatever worlds they're going to. And they do not, they're not subject to astral fog wherever they go. They have enough consciousness that they hold the divine mind and go to any world. And if there is an astral kind of barrier there, they don't get lost in it. They don't forget the divine mind. So this is what Alpha is being shown. It's like the North Node is like, look, you have the ability to do this. And then the moon, let's emotionally align with it. That would be it. I would just say, I read in the Pleiadian perspectives, I read about how some of the early times of humans coming to Earth at different periods, our souls actually went through quick incarnations through animal bodies, which is part of why we have that idea of totems. But part of the reason was to acclimate us in our physical human beings that were to come into incarnation to acclimate us to the raw environment of the earth, to know how to survive and sense it. But what I would like to suggest here is that if we start to get galactically oriented and know ourselves, in my mind, through the stellar nations, but whatever works for you, this is how we can really like embody and get galactically oriented. And my main point here, hopefully I made it, was there's a lot going on, and I think it's important to be galactically oriented.
So
And
maybe we'll just take down the last slide. Yeah, we'll take down the last slide there, Leslie.
The bigger point is the whole Cazimi idea that, hey, our son's learning to adult by his experiences, and so are we by reflection, so that's what we need to take in. And some of these stars can give us some ideas of the stellar worlds, because these are informational rays that are coming down now. We're being asked to integrate. It's a perspective that can hopefully help.
Right, exactly. And I feel like we're also having to work against some of those not so helpful arthropodic stars today. As always, doing any kind of telecommunication work these days with the use of the technology has some difficulties and challenges thrown in, and definitely experienced a few of those today here too. But Leslie, perhaps if we just take down the final slides, I have a couple of comments to bring things together from my own layperson's perspective. And the journey is incredible, and I think there's at least another 3 or 4 episodes there that we could do easily. And I know that we wanted to have a look at the Mars and Saturn piece in Pisces, but I feel like we might have a little part 2 that we're going to record, maybe even to go with this before the eclipse. We'll see. But I think what I'm really getting from what you've shared is, first of all, the importance in terms of the galactic micro and macro that we're in right now, but also that this is probably the biggest initiation we're all going to go through, even if we've been through a lot already, even some of us recently. I still feel this is a big piece to come to really what is coming in, which is the new Earth frequency. But we have to finish our work. We have to finish our initiations. And if we don't, well, then there is Baten and Kaitos to go and reflect on why we didn't want to do that, why we didn't want to come back to the light. And I know that I'm probably not the only one out there who's a little frustrated sometimes when I look around the wider space, particularly the spiritual space, and I see so much avoidance of the work that's necessary. There's a lot of, hey, I want a front row ticket seat to the new Earth, but I don't really want to have to do anything to get there. I don't really want to contribute by taking responsibility for myself. Well, that's why we have Baten and Kaitos, because those beings also don't want to take responsibility for what they've done, right? And they're much more bigger, powerful, in theory, beings than we are. But that's also to denigrate ourselves. We are the most incredible beings. Each and every one of us is some potential avatar waiting to manifest into this little old body of ours. And it's only through deviating away from the path of destiny into the path of supposed free will that we lose the abilities like these other powerful beings did, and they got trapped. And we too will also fall into the same, I think, prisons, traps, if we allow ourselves to, but we don't have to at all. The pathway is very clear. With good intention, with good inner work, with lots of reflection through the Hall of Mirrors, we can see where we still have work to do. And maybe it's uncomfortable for sure to look into the mirror and say, oh my God, I'm not quite the perfect person I want to be. In fact, I'm not even close to that. I've still got this gaping wound over here I've not dealt with. It's not nice. It's not easy, but it is really, really important. And within the context of duality, it's also just a story. It's also not really real. And it's only as real as we want to make it. And, I say that sat here with feet that are healing, and they feel pretty real to me. But in the higher realms, it's not a truth. It's not a story. It's just something that's happened to Davyd. But that mechanism is allowing me, as you know, the possibility to explore many other avenues whilst I'm immobilized, but also why did this happen? And so rather than being a victim in it, I'm saying, hey, maybe this is a blessing. I did ask to return to my divine path, and this happened 48 hours later. So I can only be in a place of trust about that. And for sure, that's why I love Stellar Nations. That's why I love doing the shows with you. It's why we do the Quantum Compass and various other shows, is to keep putting this idea into the collective that there is another way to look at things. And as long as we don't get too hooked into the arthropod world of the TV and the storylines and step back from that and feel into the more uplifting aspects of the dolphins, the whales, the unicorns, we have the potentiality for creativity and to create our world, our future. And I think that the sun is also going through that process, and it's like, hey, come on, kiddos, we can all do this together. Hey, I'm on the same journey as all of you, right? And yes, I've got to go and speak to Pops, I've got to go and speak to Mum, I've got to go and speak to the brothers and sisters, and hey, we all got to come together now to make this work as one big happy family, because nobody gets left out. Even those who are going to Baten Kaitos, hey, well, we're all part of the same family, and you're the rogue cousin who didn't really want to get on board, so we're just going to pop you over there for a bit until you realize about it. And then, hey, when you're sorted out, come back and join the rest of us. And I like to think of it like that. Otherwise, it does tend to create this sense of separation between good and bad guys and the hooligans and the angels. And it's not really that helpful because we all have all of that within us too, right? And so if we do that, we run the risk of separating some part of ourselves outside of that. And then that gets left behind, which is also not great. That's more of the fragmentation process that we've seen with Tiamat and Malbec. So I feel like they're just such great analogies to show how we have become fragmented, how the goddess became fragmented, and actually now how all of that is going to be reversed through even the story of the Andromeda Galaxy, which is part of the Mercury story. And as we do so, I think that, and as we move towards the Jupiter Cazimi, as you've rightly said, we're getting these beautiful sun messages. Hey, I'm getting it sorted out. All you have to do is show up with me. And as Archangel Michael said to me once, he said, Davyd, as long as you stand in my light, you have nothing to fear. And I really believe that Michael is very much one of the messengers of the sun. He is a solar being, really. So that's my final thoughts for today. I've absolutely loved doing this, as always. And anything else you wish to share, Leslie, before we wrap up?
I think, I mean, we've said it, but to appreciate the depth of this initiation and the depth of the shadows that we carry that we may not know, and to overcome victimhood takes self-forgiveness. And we have to understand, and I hope what we brought up by bringing up the cosmic stories is, this is the creation cycle. We have been everything. Even now, if you look at your Antares code, you're going to have pieces of your soul that are working something out, perhaps in a lower octave, and you're going to have literally Christed be pieces of your soul. And our job is to really, it's the whole divine idea for Earth, is to balance and harmonize all these disparate forces, including the masculine and feminine. That's an extra like piece of, well, it's a very objective piece of how everything's been separated. But beyond that, I mean, I think that's a conclusion. We just have to, we really have to do it. But I want to say, a big piece of this is self-forgiveness and surrender. Surrender into realizing that the light is stronger than the dark, and that we can identify with it. And it's pretty terrifying because that brings up trust. These are the 7 seeds of Christ consciousness from the Bear Nation. They were literally planted in our heart as a frequency 2,000 years ago in humanity's ethereal field of their heart. They have been like tested, and they're now coming into a blossoming at this point. And they do allow us to hold a 5th dimensional platform awareness. And when we hold that, we can watch the interplay of the third. We can take part of it, but we don't have to be it. And that's how we're creating and calling forth this 5th dimensional world, which is here. But it's going to be, I mean, I think what I'd like to say too is the experience of the 5th dimension is probably so vast, and it's analogous to the fact that our backyard is going to be all these stars. They're stellar worlds. And you want to jump into your Pegasus or on Alphas and take off and go over there because you're being asked to do that. It's a whole different game. It's all a game, but it's a different game. So
beautiful. And I think maybe from my side, the final thought I'd like to share is one that came from one of my tribe members this week. And on their own reflection process, they were being asked to forgive the unforgivable. And that sounds like a very, very difficult job. But I think that if we can forgive the unforgivable, whether it's within ourselves or with what we've witnessed around us, then we are finding the true compassion needed to really be in our heart and be in that 5D place permanently. Not, some of us have been there for a while, flickering in and out, maybe sometimes more often, sometimes falling out of it. And when you fall out of that space and you come back into the emotional pain world, it can be absolutely like, oh, I was doing so good, and now I'm back here again. And then we can break ourselves and the cycle begins again. But we have to be in a place of forgiveness about all of it. And I love that. If we can forgive the unforgivable and sit and meditate our way through those in the coming days, maybe even the 40 days. And I think we're going to be in really, really good shape. And
Right.
thank you again, Leslie, for sharing everything that you've shared today. I look forward to the next piece. The rate that we're going, it could be coming out once a week, I think, with the, with the amount of stuff that's going on. But we'll keep that as a surprise as to when and how we feel we get the nod. There are definitely more things in the astrological processes, which will then throw light on the cosmic processes. And of course, there will be another Cosmic History Codes coming out, bringing some of these threads together with myself and Bella in the coming days too. So stay tuned, everybody. Do not switch off. Maybe switch off the TV, but do not switch off the Cosmic TV, because it's a much better show, first of all. It has much better special effects. Characters are much more interesting, much more believable than most of the junk that I've been seeing on Netflix recently. And I think that if we're going to tune into anything, let's tune inside to ourselves, see what is going on for us, make sure that we are doing everything that we can to show up for ourselves in every single moment, which then becomes a continuous now. And for sure, I'm calling in the goddess, which apparently in Leslie's world is already there with her cat. And this is the year of the great
If I lock her out, she's at the door making noise. I have no
I've got the same problem with our cat. They want to be involved. And I think that's great. You know, we are very much connected to the realms of animals too, as you've shared. And as actually, I also did a piece on interspecies communication recently that many people like to report.
Yeah.
So these are all part of the interconnected web of Mother Spider's great web of life. And I think that we are always twanging on the web. And as long as we remember that life is exciting, life is beautiful, life is creative. So thank you again, Leslie. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you all again very, very soon for another episode of Cosmic History Codes. Ciao for now.
Bye-bye.